Hi guys, it's Andrew, the Urban Bayman. And over my shoulder, you'll see a flowering plant. Now, a lot of people at this time of year mistake this plant, this bush, for a cherry tree. And yes, we have cherry trees. Here's a shout out to George Washington. Not the same kind of cherry tree. Ours are choke cherries. You got to remember, we are an island in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. And as a result, our climate doesn't allow for a whole lot of variety when it comes to our plant species. Not only that, during the last ice age, you have to remember, Newfoundland represents the southernmost extreme position of the Canadian Shield. So there's very little soil here. The trees that we have, I mean, the point that I'm trying to get to here is with regard to our knowledge. And when I say our knowledge, I'm going to just say my knowledge of plant species, right? And guests, friends, family marvel at how much I know about the plants and the shrubs and the trees and the likes of that. And the fact is, again, right, I've said to you before, I don't really know as much as you think I do. But I do have a couple of secret weapons. The first is my mother, right? When it comes to anything, as soon as I see a plant, a species, anything, I'll call Mom. Let's not kid ourselves, okay? I've been at this a while, so yes, certain things, like I didn't have to call Mom about this morning, right? But I can call her, and she is a wealth of knowledge. She knows it all. If she doesn't know it, she has a network of friends. It includes Ross, Travers, and all of these leading horticulturalists, botanists throughout the island. But I think what's most important is the fact that I don't clutter myself trying to remember it all. I'll identify. So right now, this flower that you see over your shoulder, if I was guiding, and normally this would be the season, I will identify this one right out of the gate because that's what we're going to see for the next 2 to 3 weeks. And as a result, I'm going to be pointing out the flowers in the bushes. What's interesting about the flowers in the bushes is the fact that we call them chuckly pear. All right? It's a Newfoundland name, and from what I can gather and what I've seen, the research I've done, that is where the name comes from right here in Newfoundland. Chuckly comes from a bummer. It's an old Irish-English translation, basically means poor quality. And it's a chuckly pear, thus a poor quality pear. This actually produces a beautiful, beautiful fruit. The fruit is supposed to have the taste of a mix of grapes, cherries, and almonds. Grape, cherry, and almond. We call it a chuckly pear. Not many Newfoundlanders are aware of this, right? Not many of them that will even bother to pick the chuckly pear, right? And I have a whole theory on that, and I'll probably finish this video on that point. But for your purposes right now, the chuckly pear is actually a really well-known berry, right? In Canada, we call it a Saskatoon berry. In the United States, they call it a June berry. In fact, from what I can read and understand, there's actually quite a racket going on between the United States and the Canadians over what the proper nomenclature should be, right? For my money, I think the two should pull back and look at the beautiful name that we've provided here in Newfoundland, a chuckly pear. When I say Newfoundlanders don't eat them, I mean, obviously they do. My mother, we grew up with chuckly pear jams and jellies and the likes of that, but not many people do. Not many people know a whole lot about any of the edibles, myself included, guys. When I first moved home and started touring again, I remember the first tour that I did down the Great Northern Peninsula, I was explaining to the people, because on that coast, you know, most of Newfoundland's history is really a European history. But the Great Northern Peninsula is all about our Aboriginal people. It's a far more ancient history. It's about our Aboriginal people and about the Norse. Where was I going with this now? We don't have an Aboriginal. Now I got it fooled up, but I'm going to try and push through this anyway. We don't have an Aboriginal name, or we don't use an Aboriginal name for the chuckly pear. And that is mostly due to the fact that we haven't had any crossover. That's what I was talking about, was the fact, my apologies, about edibles, right? When I did that first tour, right, I actually told the people, right, we were talking about the Aboriginal history, we were talking about the fact that the island, there'd be no reason at this period in our history for any indigenous people to be living in Newfoundland, on account of the fact that there was nothing here. My brother David often says Newfoundland is the only place in North America where you could actually die of scurvy, right? Because there's no edibles, and that's how we all grew up. Talk to any Newfoundlander. Don't touch that. Don't eat that. Geez, that'll make you sick, right? Everything was poisonous. Everything was inedible, other than dandelion leaves, blueberries, strawberries, wild strawberries, raspberries, right? I mean, aside from that, we really thought, believed, practiced in a land that had no edibles. My sister-in-law, Lori, there's the wind coming up, oh no, I hope it's not going to ruin this video. My sister-in-law, Lori, was the first to actually, when I say the first, perhaps there were those before, but she's the first celebrity chef that actually introduced us to all of the wonderful edibles and the infusions that they provide for this beautiful food culture that we have in Newfoundland. Lori, and this is where I got fooled up there a minute ago, Lori is actually teaching our Aboriginal community about the edibles, about the foraging that's here. And when you wonder about that and you think about that, it really comes back to the fact that the closest thing that you're going to find to an indigenous people in Newfoundland right now, and when I talk about the island, it's people that look like me, right? I actually have Aboriginal blood. Our great-great-grandfather Murphy took up with a girl by the name of Alice MacDonald from the Con, right? Just like the French, Newfoundlanders made families with the Aboriginal community, an Aboriginal community that arrived here at pretty much the same time we did, who had very little interaction with the indigenous people who remained here, and therefore didn't have the opportunity to learn, to share, to understand about what edibles were here, right? And again, let's not kid ourselves. We were a people that we had boats, right? We could import whatever foods were required. Newfoundland was all about producing protein, right? We didn't get into the wilds, into the wilderness. Again, a very paganistic people, one single mass migration in our history. They came out of the Bristol Channel, they came out of Waterford, right? In a very paganistic period in our history, when we were frightened to death of everything. Let's not kid ourselves, right? We didn't spend any time in the interior of the island because the fairies might take you, right? And as a result, with everything we wanted on the coast, protein and imports and the likes, without the knowledge base that would have been shared by an indigenous people who were pretty much disappeared before we got here, right? We never learned about foraging and about our edibles. Just to finish this up, I'll leave you on a note, because I ended up picking up a great friend of mine, a fellow by the name of Cabot Martin. Cabot was in Port aux Basques. He's writing his memoirs. And his memoirs, as they relate to Port aux Basques, and how Port aux Basques, as the southwesternmost point of Newfoundland, relates to the rest of North America and how we influenced their history. While we were driving back, I started to talk to Cabot about an idea. And you may have heard me mention this already. I've just finished reading the ecological history of North America. And it was only through that I came to truly appreciate the history of the 17th century, especially the ecological history, especially the fact that we had a mini ice age. Guys, you have to remember that in Newfoundland, we have had several attempts to establish an indigenous people on this island. Right, go to Port aux Choix on the Great Northern Peninsula. There is archaeological evidence there. Maritime archaic Indians who were here in 6500 BC and disappeared. Not overnight, right? Again, you got to remove the Hollywood and the drama from your history. The maritime archaic people were marginalized by a change in climate. The climate has been changing since the Earth began, right? But for a marginalized people with very little technology, right, a change in temperature would have greatly affected their survival abilities on this island. This is a hard spot, or it can be, right? So they never disappeared. It's not like a meteor hit the earth and wiped them out, right? Whether they moved abroad or were gradually so weakened by the lack of food that was available to them with the changing climate, they disappeared. As did the Dorset Eskimo. The exact same thing. Port aux Choix. Every single indigenous group, by the way, that has ever attempted to establish a community here in Newfoundland has done so in Port aux Choix. The Dorset Eskimo, Paleolithic Eskimo, the Biatic people, and even arguably ourselves. Right? When I spoke to Cabot about this, I said, Cabot, you know what happened to the Biatic? Because again, guys, we grew up thinking that we wiped out the indigenous people, that we wiped out the Biatic. And if you really read the history, right, as I've done this year, you'll realize that, are you for real? Right? Do you not know any Aboriginal people? Right? Do you know how tough these guys are? Do you think one guy, this guy Peyton, went in and wiped out an entire race of people? Come on. Right? It's just not possible. Right? Then we tend to think of, and I've heard Miso and I have had this conversation about the Mi'kmaq and the Micmac and the Aboriginal people that were brought here during the 17th century as new Canadians or as part of New France. Right? Then you start to think, okay, these guys were brought here by the French to fight against the English. When the French lost, nobody offered them a ride home. Right? They were left here with weapons, with modern technology, with metals. Wouldn't it be fair to assume that they had played some role? They took on some responsibility. They were fighting people, right? We all were, right? Do you think that maybe they were involved with the demise of the Biatic, right? Well, it was a theory that I was working on for the longest time until most recently. And right now, I am convinced that the Biatic people, just like every other indigenous group that have tried to establish a community here on the island of Newfoundland, they were marginalized by that ice age in the 17th century. So badly weakened. I mean, when you read the history, you see how difficult it was to find them, right? We have archaeological evidence. They were definitely here. But nobody, right, other than a few very brief skirmishes with what was likely the very last of that race, right? There's no other records. When I explained this to Cabot, he cursed me, right? And when I say cursed me, I mean, you don't know. He's not really capable of that. But he was poisoned on account of the fact that he said, I'm going to have to rewrite so much of the history that I've written here. Because you're right. That's exactly what happened to the Biatic people. Guys, if you have a chance, you're out and about this week, you're looking for something. Guys, when you're driving in the car and you're looking for something to talk to with the children or whoever your mate is, turn down the radio, right? Pay attention. Moose around the road, remember. It's a good opportunity to talk, and this makes a great topic of discussion. Because the chocolate pear, as I mentioned before, the rest of the world is a June berry. It's a Saskatoon berry. But we think that the Newfoundland name is most appropriate. I hope you get a chuckle at this. Chuckle over the chocolate pear. I'm Andrew McCarthy. I'm the Urban Bayman. I ask you to subscribe to our channel. And please, any thoughts, any comments that you have on this, I would greatly appreciate an opportunity to discuss them with you. Thanks, guys.